The dust settled not just on the parched ground of Harmony Gulch, but on the very soul of Sheriff Gideon Thorne, when he made a choice that would echo far beyond the town limits, a choice that seemed to defy every fiber of the society he had sworn to protect. It was a decision born not of logic, but of a quiet, desperate empathy, a whisper in the heart of a man hardened by years of small-town justice and the crushing weight of unspoken burdens. What he did next, in the stifling heat of a forgotten summer, threatened to dismantle his entire world. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. Harmony Gulch existed as a scar on the land, carved out by ambition and neglect, its buildings leaning precariously as if yearning for the earth to reclaim them. Sheriff Gideon Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of weary lines and shadowed eyes, navigated its dusty streets with a practiced indifference, his silhouette a familiar, imposing figure against the ochre sunsets. He was a man of few words, his presence speaking volumes in the rustle of his leather belt and the soft creak of his boots. The town knew him as a fair, if stern, hand of the law, a man who rarely bent, but also one who rarely broke. Beneath that stoic exterior, however, resided a labyrinth of unresolved grief and a deeply ingrained sense of injustice, a raw wound festering silently within him since a tragedy that had claimed all that mattered to him years ago. This unaddressed pain had molded him, leaving him brittle yet capable of surprising tenderness, a paradox few in Harmony Gulch bothered to decipher. They saw only the badge, the uniform, the unwavering gaze that could pierce through flimsy excuses. Yet, it was this very same gaze that often lingered too long on the town's silent sufferers, the ones society deemed disposable. The orphanage, a crumbling edifice on the outskirts, was one such place, a repository for the forgotten, a stark reminder of humanity's casual cruelty. Gideon often rode past it, the screams and whimpers of the children, especially a young girl's frail cries, a discordant melody against the otherwise mundane sounds of the gulch, catching in the dusty air and settling, unbidden, in his hardened conscience. He knew the stories, the dismissive whispers, the town's collective agreement that some lives held less value than others, a truth as immutable as the harsh landscape itself. He had seen countless children pass through its dilapidated doors, their eyes prematurely aged, their hopes slowly extinguished, but one particular child had begun to occupy a space in his thoughts that he hadn't realized was empty. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth until it cracked, mirroring the widening fissures in the town's brittle facade of civility. The annual Orphans gathering, a grim charade disguised as a benevolent community event, was underway. It was less an adoption fair, and more a spectacle of human warehousing, where local families or those passing through with a morbid curiosity would survey the silent, nervous children, picking and choosing as if at a livestock auction. This year, the air was thicker with a palpable tension, not just from the oppressive heat, but from a growing desperation within the orphanage itself. Whispers had circulated for weeks about dwindling funds, about the looming threat of closure, a prospect that would cast dozens of vulnerable children onto the unforgiving streets. Among them, a wisp of a girl named Alara, barely 6 years old, stood out not for her boisterousness but for her profound stillness. Her left leg was malformed, twisted inward, forcing her to rely on a crude crutch carved from a tree branch, making every movement a visible struggle. Her eyes, startlingly blue against a face smudged with dirt, held a depth of understanding far beyond her years, a silent plea that resonated with an almost unbearable intensity. They were the eyes of a creature already resigned to abandonment, to a life lived in the shadows, perpetually unwanted. The family circled, their gazes flitting past her, lingering instead on the healthier, more outwardly appealing children. Each dismissive glance was a physical blow, though unseen, a fresh cut on her already bruised spirit. Gideon Thorne watched from the periphery, his back leaning against a sun-baked wagon wheel, his arms crossed over his chest. He saw the cold calculation in the eyes of the townsfolk, the quick assessments of utility and burden. He saw the way Alara flinched with each passing shadow, how her small frame seemed to shrink further into itself. The air throbbed with a silent, collective rejection, A communal declaration that this child was not worth the effort, not worth the perceived trouble. A raw, illogical impulse, alien to his structured life, began to stir within him, a desperate throb that defied reason. It was an echo of a promise he had once made to himself, a silent vow broken by circumstance, now demanding to be honored in an unexpected, defiant way. The silence of the crowd, punctuated only by the rustle of fabric and the distant bleating of sheep, intensified, pressing down on the scene, making the unsaid more powerful than any shouted word. Then, a voice, reedy and laced with thinly veiled contempt, sliced through the quietude. "No one wants the lame one. A waste of good food, if you ask me." It belonged to Mrs. Gable, a woman whose piety was as ostentatious as her feathered hats, yet whose heart was as barren as the desert floor. Her words, though directed at no one in particular, landed squarely on Ilara, who visibly recoiled, her tiny hand clutching her makeshift crutch as if it were her only anchor in a storm-tossed world. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective nod of agreement, a shameful consensus. It was a moment of stark, brutal clarity for Gideon. He saw the full weight of societal prejudice, the casual cruelty that could condemn a child to a life of utter solitude, simply for being born imperfect. He straightened, pushing away from the wagon, his movements deliberate, his jaw set. A profound, almost spiritual weariness settled over him, mingling with a burgeoning anger that was as cold as a mountain spring. He walked forward, his boots stirring the dust, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly hushed gathering. Every eye turned to him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. The orphanage matron, a woman whose face bore the marks of countless heartbreaks, looked up, her own gaze a mixture of surprise and a flicker of something resembling desperate hope. Gideon stopped directly in front of Ilara. Her eyes, wide and luminous, met his, devoid of expectation, full of a quiet, profound resignation. He saw not a burden, but a broken bird, a nascent flicker of light that the world was determined to extinguish. He pulled a worn leather pouch from his pocket, the clinking of coins starkly audible in the heavy silence. "How much?" he asked, his voice low, a gravelly whisper that nonetheless carried to the farthest corners of the gathering. The matron stammered, surprised. "Sheriff, she's not fit for work, not sturdy, she's—" Gideon cut her off, his eyes never leaving Ilara's. I asked, "How much?" He understood the unspoken, ugly calculus of their world, the assigning of monetary value to human lives. He would play their game, but on his terms. He counted out the sum, a ludicrously small amount for a human life, but in the twisted logic of Harmony Gulch, it was enough. The matron, still dazed, accepted the coins. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. Gideon extended his hand to Ilara, his large fingers gently closing around her small, trembling one. He didn't offer a smile or empty platitudes. He simply held her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. "Come on, little one," he murmured, his voice softer than anyone in Harmony Gulch had ever heard it. The town watched, aghast, as the stern, unyielding sheriff, the embodiment of their harsh justice, led away the girl no one wanted, a ripple of disbelief and simmering outrage already spreading through the dusty street. It was an act of defiance, a quiet revolution that had just begun to unfurl. The walk from the orphanage to Gideon's small, austere house on the edge of town felt like an eternity, each step echoing with the unspoken judgment of Harmony Gulch. Ilara, clutching her crutch, limped beside him, her head bowed, her small hand swallowed by his large one. The silence between them was thick, weighted not with discomfort, but with the enormity of the unknown. Gideon, a man accustomed to the solitude of his own thoughts, found himself acutely aware of her small, vulnerable presence, a delicate counterpoint to his own rough-hewn existence. His house, a bachelor's abode, was sparse, functional, imbued with the scent of old leather and stale coffee. There were no feminine touches, no frivolity, just the stark necessities of a life lived alone. The living room, with its worn armchair and unlit hearth, seemed to swallow Ilara whole, her diminutive figure lost in its cavernous emptiness. She stood frozen, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space, a mixture of fear and profound bewilderment flickering in their depths. Gideon knelt before her, his knees cracking. He saw the hunger in her eyes, not just for food, but for safety, for a place to simply be. He didn't know what to say, how to bridge the chasm of their different worlds. He offered her a biscuit, dry and plain, but she devoured it with a ravenous hunger that twisted something inside him. He pointed to a small, dusty guest room. This will be yours." The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He watched as she took a tentative step towards it, her crutch thudding softly on the wooden floor. A memory, sharp and unbidden, pierced through Gideon's carefully constructed emotional walls. It was of a long-lost daughter, a tiny, vibrant thing with eyes just as blue, whose laughter had once filled a very different house. The ghost of that laughter, a bittersweet melody, now played in the silent corners of his mind, a reminder of the joy he had lost, and the reason he had chosen a life of such barren isolation. He had promised himself he would never allow himself to care again, to feel the searing pain of loss. Yet, here he was, staring at a child, feeling the familiar, terrifying pull of connection. The decision to take her had been impulsive, a desperate rebellion against the town's callousness, but now the reality of it settled over him, heavy and unyielding. The whispers in town began immediately, weaving their insidious tendrils through the dusty streets. The sheriff's gone soft. He's lost his mind, taking on a crippled orphan. There's something unseemly about it. Gideon felt the weight of their judgment, the narrowing of their eyes, the subtle shifts in their greetings. He was no longer just the sheriff. He was the pariah, the man who defied the established order, the one who dared to care for the unwanted. The whispers in Harmony Gulch quickly escalated into an almost tangible hum of disapproval, a dissonant chorus that followed Gideon wherever he went. The townspeople, once deferential, now met his gaze with a mixture of suspicion and thinly veiled contempt. Storekeepers were less inclined to offer credit. Children would fall silent as he passed, and the men at the saloon would lower their voices, their eyes flickering towards him with a knowing disdain. He was no longer just the sheriff. He was a walking affront to their established norms, a direct challenge to their collective apathy. His very presence, with Ilara now a constant shadow in his life, served as an uncomfortable mirror to their own failings, and they resented him for it. Ilara, despite her youth, seemed to sense the shift in the town's demeanor. Her already timid nature became more pronounced, her small figure hunching whenever they were in public. She would cling to his hand, her grip surprisingly strong, as if drawing courage from his stoic presence. The burden of protection, both physical and emotional, settled heavily on Gideon's shoulders. He found himself constantly vigilant, scanning faces, anticipating sneers, ready to intercept the venomous words hurled their way. One sweltering afternoon, as they walked past the general store, a group of young men, emboldened by their numbers and the potent brew of small-town prejudice, blocked their path. Jebediah Cobb, a burly lout whose father owned most of the fertile land outside town, sneered, "Look at the sheriff, playing nursemaid. That's no job for a man of the law, Thorne. You gone soft in the head?" His cronies snickered, their eyes lingering mockingly on Ilara's leg. Gideon's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden stillness in his posture, the dangerous glint in his eyes, was more effective than any shout. "Move along, Cobb," he said, his voice a low growl, "before I find you a new purpose in life shoveling horse manure." The threat, veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air. Cobb hesitated, his bravado wavering under Gideon's unwavering stare. He grumbled, but ultimately stepped aside, ushering his friends away, defeated but resentful. This confrontation, minor as it seemed, was merely a harbinger of the greater challenges to come. The town's resentment wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Mayor Thompson, a man whose political ambitions far outweighed his moral fiber, summoned Gideon to his office, the air thick with the smell of stale cigars and manufactured indignation. "Sheriff, we've had concerns. Folks are saying your judgment is clouded. This girl, she's a distraction, a liability. It's affecting your duties." His words were smooth, practiced, dripping with insincerity. Gideon simply listened, his face impassive, knowing that the real accusation was not about his duties, but about his audacious act of compassion. The pressure mounted, a relentless, suffocating force. He was being tested, and in their twisted logic, they wanted him to break. The mayor's veiled threats and the town's increasing hostility only served to steel Gideon's resolve, cementing a profound, if unspoken, bond with Alara. He understood that protecting her meant more than shielding her from harsh words. It meant delving into the murky depths of Harmony Gulch's hidden truths. There was a secret here, he felt it, a deeper current of malice beneath the surface of the town's outward prejudice. His instincts, honed by years of sniffing out lies and injustices, screamed at him. He began to subtly re-examine old case files, particularly those pertaining to the orphanage and the various children who had passed through its doors, or, more disturbingly, disappeared from them. A recurring name, discreetly redacted in official documents, caught his attention. The benefactor. The orphanage had purportedly received a substantial, anonymous donation years ago, just before a particularly virulent outbreak of influenza had swept through the valley, leaving many children parentless. The timing felt too convenient, the anonymity too absolute. Gideon remembered the hushed rumors, the rapid succession of certain child deaths, particularly those with less visible but still debilitating ailments, much like Alara's own affliction. He began to notice a pattern in the reports. Illnesses described vaguely, quick burials, minimal public record. It was as if certain children were simply erased. He revisited the matron, ostensibly to check on the orphanage's dwindling supplies, but his true purpose lay in the subtle, probing questions he posed, the way he watched her eyes when he mentioned the benefactor or the mysterious illnesses. Her face, usually a mask of weary resilience, flickered with a sudden, profound fear. She spoke of powerful individuals, of sacrifices for the greater good. Her voice hushed, tinged with a terror that went beyond mere gossip. She mentioned an old, forgotten register, meticulously kept by a previous, now deceased matron, rumored to contain true accounts of every child, every intake, every departure. But it had vanished years ago. Gideon felt a chill. Despite the heat, the pieces were beginning to align, forming a chilling mosaic of calculated cruelty. His own past, a raw, unhealed wound, pulsed with renewed intensity. He saw the face of his own daughter, vibrant and full of life, before the fever took her, swift and merciless. He remembered the desperate, helpless feeling, the aching emptiness that followed. The memory fueled his anger, hardening his resolve. He wouldn't let this happen to another child, not if he could help it. He wouldn't stand by while the powerful preyed on the helpless, exploiting their vulnerability under the guise of benevolence. He would uncover the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter the cost. Gideon's search for the missing register led him down a rabbit hole of forgotten alleys and whispered secrets, each revelation deepening the unsettling puzzle of Harmony Gulch. His investigations, once discreet, became more pronounced, his presence in unusual places drawing further suspicion. He discovered an old abandoned tannery on the outskirts of town, long disused and rumored to be haunted. Its putrid smell still clung to the air, a grim reminder of its industrial past. Inside, nestled beneath decaying sacks of curing salt, he found it. A leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age, its copperplate script meticulous and damning. It was the previous matron's hidden record, a defiant act against the corruption she had witnessed. The entries were chilling. Beyond the expected names and dates, there were cryptic notes, coded references to special cases, and collections, followed by the chilling phrase, "delivered to the benefactor." The benefactor was not just a donor, he was a collector. And the collections were not items but children, specifically children with imperfections, malformed limbs, weak constitutions, intellectual delays. Alara's description tragically fit the profile. The ledger detailed a horrifying scheme. A powerful, influential figure in Harmony Gulch, hiding behind a facade of philanthropy, was orchestrating the removal of undesirable children from the orphanage, not for adoption, but for a far more sinister purpose. The vague illnesses and quick burials were covers for these disappearances. The matron's fear, her hushed words about sacrifices, now made horrifying sense. Gideon traced the entries, his finger following the names, a growing dread tightening its grip around his heart. He saw names he recognized from town families, children they had claimed died of common childhood diseases, but who were, according to the ledger, collected. This wasn't merely a dark secret, it was a deeply ingrained malignancy, protected by the town's most powerful families. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. The very pillars of Harmony Gulch, those who preached morality and upheld social order, were the architects of this quiet horror. He now knew why Alara had been so desperately unwanted at the Orphan's gathering. She was a marked child, intended for this clandestine network, her imperfection making her a prime candidate. His act of defiance, his spontaneous purchase, had inadvertently ripped her from the jaws of a silent predatory machine. The realization settled over him with the weight of cold steel. He wasn't just protecting a girl, he was dismantling a conspiracy, a dark underbelly of Harmony Gulch that stretched back for years, tainting everything it touched. He had no illusions about the fight ahead. These were powerful men who would stop at nothing to protect their reputations, their secrets, and their macabre enterprise. The ledger was a death warrant, not just for the perpetrators, but potentially for him too. The silence of the tannery, thick with dust and the ghosts of its grim history, seemed to press in on him, heavy with the enormity of the truth he now held. The discovery of the ledger shattered the fragile peace Gideon had managed to construct, igniting a cold fury within him. He was no longer merely a lawman. He was a vengeful force, propelled by a profound sense of justice and a burgeoning protectiveness for Alara. The names within the ledger were prominent, their influence woven into the very fabric of Harmony Gulch. Mayor Thompson, Judge Albright, and even the self-righteous Mrs. Gable, whose family had silently benefited from the disappearances, receiving donations in exchange for their complicity. The true benefactor was a shadowy figure, known only as the proprietor, a wealthy, reclusive land baron who owned most of the mining operations and seemingly pulled every string in the valley. He orchestrated the collections for reasons still obscured, but the implications were horrifying. Gideon knew he couldn't simply present the ledger to the authorities. They were either complicit or too intimidated to act. He was isolated, a lone wolf against a pack. He understood that exposing this truth would not just end his career, it would shatter the town, expose its darkest corners, and likely endanger his and Alara's lives. The tension in Harmony Gulch was a palpable entity, a living, breathing thing that coiled around every interaction. The air crackled with unspoken threats, with the weight of secrets too terrible to voice. Gideon felt eyes on him constantly, shadows lengthening, whispers multiplying. He knew they were watching, waiting for him to make a move, to falter. Alara, attuned to the shift in his demeanor, became quieter, her large blue eyes reflecting the deepening shadows in his own. She drew pictures for him, crude but heartfelt, of him as a giant, protecting a tiny flower, a poignant testament to her nascent trust and her subconscious understanding of the danger they faced. These drawings, tacked haphazardly on his kitchen wall, became his silent resolve, his constant reminder of what he was fighting for. He spent his nights meticulously cross-referencing the ledger with old birth and death certificates, property records, and forgotten newspaper clippings. He found discrepancies, impossibilities, patterns of sudden wealth coinciding with mysterious disappearances. The evidence was overwhelming, damning. He crafted a plan, risky and desperate, but the only one he believed could force the truth into the harsh light of day. He would expose them publicly, in a forum where their influence would be minimized, where the collective conscience of ordinary people might just be stirred. He decided on the annual town hall meeting, a supposedly democratic assembly where common folk could voice their concerns. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice, but Gideon knew he had no other recourse. He had made a choice months ago, a quiet act of defiance that had brought this vulnerable child into his life, and now that choice demanded a confrontation of epic proportions. There would be no turning back. The path was set, leading to an inevitable collision with the darkness that permeated Harmony Gulch. The evening of the town hall meeting descended upon Harmony Gulch like a suffocating shroud. A strange, heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant croaking of frogs and the nervous shuffle of feet, making their way to the community hall. Everyone in town seemed to sense that something momentous was about to occur, though few understood the true gravity of it. Gideon, dressed in his crispest uniform, the badge gleaming dully in the fading light, felt the weight of his chosen path pressing down on him. He had left Ilara with a trusted elderly woman on the outskirts of town, knowing the storm that was about to break. He clutched the ledger beneath his arm, its worn leather a familiar comfort, its contents a deadly weapon. The hall was packed, stiflingly hot despite the open windows. The usual boisterous chatter was replaced by a low hum of anticipation, punctuated by the occasional cough or throat clearing. Mayor Thompson sat at the head table, flanked by Judge Albright and other prominent figures, their faces a mixture of forced smiles and barely concealed tension. Their eyes, though, kept darting towards Gideon, a silent challenge passing between them. Gideon took his usual seat towards the back, observing, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, noting the faces of those who would condemn him, and the few, like the orphanage matron, whose eyes held a desperate, frightened hope. The meeting began with tedious discussions of taxes and road repairs, but the undercurrent of unease was palpable. When the floor was opened for new business, Gideon rose, his movements slow and deliberate. A hush fell over the room, absolute and immediate. Every eye in the hall was fixed on him, their collective breath held. He walked to the front, placing the ledger on the table with a soft thud that resonated like a gunshot in the sudden silence. He didn't speak immediately, letting the tension build, letting the weight of the moment press down on everyone present. His eyes swept across the faces of the council, then to the townsfolk, his gaze unwavering, accusatory. "For too long," he began, his voice low yet carrying to every corner of the room, "this town has turned a blind eye. For too long its conscience has been bought and sold, its most vulnerable devoured by its most powerful." His words, heavily rhetorical, hung in the air, chilling and stark. The mayor's face tightened, his knuckles white against the polished wood of the table. "Sheriff, this is hardly the forum for—" Gideon cut him off, his voice rising, gaining a raw emotional intensity. "This is the only forum, Mayor. The forum where the truth, no matter how ugly, must finally be heard." He opened the ledger, its pages revealing the meticulously kept secrets of their community. This was it, the point of no return, the end of his life as they knew it, but perhaps the beginning of something else. Gideon began to read from the ledger, his voice steady, though imbued with a righteous tremor that silenced even the most defiant whispers. He spoke of the benefactor, of the special cases marked for collection, of the names of children whose disappearances had been conveniently explained away by illness or abandonment. Each name he uttered was a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and horror through the assembly. He detailed the patterns, the dates, the insidious network of complicity that stretched from the orphanage to the highest offices of Harmony Gulch. The mayor's face became a mask of strained fury. His attempts to interrupt met with a cold, unwavering glare from Gideon, and a growing chorus of murmurs from the now incensed townsfolk. Judge Albright shifted uncomfortably, his usual air of dignified authority crumbling. Mrs. Gable, perched nervously in the front row, seemed to shrink, her elaborate hat suddenly appearing ludicrously out of place. The atmosphere in the hall shifted from nervous anticipation to a volatile mixture of disbelief, outrage, and burgeoning fear. Some townsfolk gasped, others wept openly, recognizing names, recalling hushed rumors, seeing the pieces of a terrible puzzle finally slot into place. The truth, stark and brutal, was laid bare for all to see. These weren't simple disappearances, Gideon stated, his voice ringing with a powerful, poetic clarity. These were children stolen, lives extinguished, dreams annihilated, all under the very noses of those sworn to protect them, by those who feigned benevolence even as they perpetrated monstrous acts. He held up the ledger, its aged pages a testament to the hidden atrocities. "This," he declared, his voice rising to a crescendo, "is the true face of Harmony Gulch's justice." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mayor Thompson, pale with rage and fear, finally exploded. "This is slander, delirious accusations. You've gone mad, Sheriff. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to justify your own scandalous behavior. You, a man who shelters the—" But his words were drowned out by a roar from the crowd, a mix of anger and dismay. Someone shouted, "What about Ilara? Is she one of them, Sheriff?" Gideon turned, his eyes searching the faces in the crowd, landing on the orphanage matron, whose face was a study in terror and guilt. He pointed to a specific entry in the ledger, detailing the intended collection of a child matching Ilara's description, slated for the very day he had intervened. Ilara, he stated, his voice thick with emotion, was meant to be the next name in this book, but a twist of fate, a desperate choice, spared her. He looked directly at the mayor. "My scandalous behavior, as you call it, saved a life from your monstrous network." The mayor, his face contorted with fury, slammed his fist on the table. "You're done, Thorne, you hear me? Your career ends here, you're a disgrace to the badge." The words hung in the air, a direct assault on Gideon's professional life. But for Gideon, they were hollow, insignificant. He had already lost everything once. What truly mattered was the truth, now laid bare, undeniably so, for all to witness. The silence that followed was pregnant with the weight of the exposed horror. The mayor's furious declaration, "Your career ends here," hung in the air, a pronouncement that would once have crushed Gideon. But tonight it was merely a dull thud against the armor of his newfound conviction. He knew the cost, had accepted it long before he walked into that hall. The ensuing chaos was immediate and visceral. The townspeople, confronted with the brutal reality of their community's dark heart, erupted in a cacophony of shouts, accusations, and indignant cries. Families turned on each other, long-buried suspicions exploding into open hostility. The flimsy facade of Harmony Gulch's civility shattered, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. Some screamed for justice, others for the mayor's head, still others simply for an explanation. Mayor Thompson, Judge Albright, and their cronies, their faces etched with fear and fury, attempted to regain control, but their authority had evaporated. Their power, once absolute, now lay in tatters, exposed by the damning words of a disgraced sheriff and the undeniable evidence of a forgotten ledger. Amidst the pandemonium, Gideon stood stoic, his eyes sweeping over the enraged faces, the crying women, the bewildered children peering in through the windows. He had done what he set out to do. He had struck a match in the darkness, and now the fire would spread, consuming the carefully constructed lies that had suffocated Harmony Gulch for so long. The immediate aftermath was brutal. The mayor, desperate to save face, officially stripped Gideon of his badge, proclaiming him a rogue, a man who had gone beyond the bounds of his authority, an unstable element. It was a swift, humiliating dismissal, a public stripping of his identity. The insignia, once a symbol of his place and purpose, now felt like a heavy, cold weight. Yet as the badge was roughly torn from his chest, Gideon felt a strange lightness, a liberation. The constraints of his office, the compromises he had endured, were gone. He was no longer bound by their twisted laws. He was simply a man, free to follow his own moral compass. The official end of his career was a mere formality. The real ending had been the silent surrender of his isolation, the moment he had chosen to save a child no one wanted, embracing a purpose far greater than any title could confer. The true impact of his actions rippled outward, beyond the confines of the chaotic hall. The story would spread like wildfire, carried by the wind and by frightened whispers, far beyond the dusty reaches of Harmony Gulch. In the immediate aftermath, Harmony Gulch became a town undone. The fragile peace had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by an uneasy quiet punctuated by fervent whispers and simmering outrage. Mayor Thompson and Judge Albright, though momentarily disgraced, still clung to their positions, their power now precarious but not entirely diminished. The wealthy proprietor remained a shadowy, untouchable figure. His influence still felt like a cold hand around the town's throat. Gideon, stripped of his badge and his official standing, was an outcast, yet paradoxically, he was also a beacon. Some of the townspeople, shamed by their complicity or moved by the raw truth, began to rally around him, quietly offering support, their eyes reflecting a newfound respect. The orphanage matron, tears streaming down her face, brought him a basket of food, a gesture of profound gratitude, and a silent plea for forgiveness. Ilara, Sensing the drastic shift in their lives, remained mostly silent, but her small hand found his more frequently, a quiet reassurance in the storm. She watched him with an intensity that belied her years, her blue eyes reflecting a deep, unwavering trust that was more precious to him than any badge. Their world, once defined by the rigid boundaries of his law enforcement career, was now boundless, uncertain, and filled with an almost terrifying freedom. They moved to a small isolated cabin deep in the foothills, a place where the air was clean, and the whispers of Harmony Gulch couldn't reach them. Gideon, a man of routine and order, found himself grappling with the unfamiliar rhythm of a life untethered. He chopped wood, hunted for their food, and tended a small, stubborn garden, his hands, once accustomed to firearms and handcuffs, now calloused by the earth. He taught Alara to read, her eager mind absorbing every word, her small finger tracing the letters on the worn pages of old books he had salvaged. He taught her about the stars, about the resilience of nature, about the quiet strength that lay within her. He often found himself watching her, a profound tenderness blooming in his chest, a feeling he hadn't thought himself capable of experiencing again. She was no longer just the disabled orphan girl. She was Alara, a fierce, intelligent spirit blossoming under his unconventional care. The burden of their shared secret, of the darkness they had uncovered, still weighed heavily, a constant reminder of the world they had left behind, but it was offset by the burgeoning hope within their small, quiet existence. The ending of his career had been a shattering blow, but it had also been an emancipation. He was no longer defined by the expectations of a flawed society, but by the quiet, defiant act of love that had redefined his entire existence. Years flowed like the mountain stream near their cabin, carving new paths, smoothing rough edges. Harmony Gulch, though forever scarred by the revelations Gideon had unleashed, slowly began to heal, albeit imperfectly. The wealthy proprietor eventually faced some form of justice, though it was cloaked in the quiet anonymity of backroom deals, his vast empire crumbling from within rather than by public decree. The orphanage, under new, genuinely compassionate management, became a true haven, a place of healing rather than a holding pen for the unwanted. The town, chastened by its past, developed a strained, almost melancholic introspection. It never fully shed its prejudices, but the collective shame of the past forced a slow, painful evolution. Gideon, no longer Sheriff Thorne, but simply Gideon, found a profound peace in the secluded rhythm of his life with Alara. She grew into a remarkable young woman, her limp still present, a testament to her past struggles, but her spirit unbowed, vibrant, and fiercely independent. Her eyes, once filled with terror and resignation, now sparkled with intelligence and a quiet joy. Her mind, nurtured by Gideon's tireless efforts, soared. She devoured books, learned to observe the intricate dance of nature, and developed a keen understanding of human nature, a wisdom born from her own early suffering. Her malformed leg, once a symbol of her unwantedness, became a testament to her resilience, a visible metaphor for her journey from brokenness to wholeness. The but in Gideon's story was not a grand redemption, not a triumphant return to public life. It was far more profound, more human. His career had indeed ended in disgrace in the public eye, but in its ashes, something infinitely more precious had emerged. He had found purpose not in enforcing laws, but in embodying a deeper, unspoken law of compassion and unwavering loyalty. He had rebuilt his shattered world, not with concrete and steel, but with patience, kindness, and a quiet, profound love. He had found a family where he least expected it, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. His life with Alara was a testament to the transformative power of a single, defiant choice, a stark contrast to the life he might have lived, consumed by bitterness and isolation. He had traded the badge for a life of authentic connection, the respect of a flawed society for the unconditional love of a single, extraordinary soul. And as he watched Alara, strong and graceful in her own way, navigating the uneven terrain of their mountain home, he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he had never been more truly himself, more truly alive, than in this quiet, unassuming life he had built, a life born from the ashes of everything he had lost. His career ended, but his true life had just begun.